Awesome. Yeah, so I'll be talking. I'm in Charlie Nunn's lab at Duke in the Department of Evolutionary Anthropology. So I'm anthropologist, so a bit different than a virology talk, but hopefully exciting in different ways. Most of our work takes place in rural northeast Madagascar, and so all the data I'll be talking about today comes from that area. Um, to set the context, so we all know that human mobility is really important for understanding infectious disease transmission. The lack of empirical evidence for this was really, highlighted in the 70s. But then since then, there's been a lot of empirical work showing the importance of mobility, both regionally and across national borders, for the spread of infectious disease. A lot of good work, specifically in vector-borne diseases. Stoddard et al. In a 2009 paper really laid out sort of a conceptual frame for thinking about this that you can see here in this figure where they talk about along the x-axis you can think about mobility across different spatial scales all the way from the neighborhood level up to the international level, and then different temporal scales as well, from daily movement patterns to residential movement patterns, migration on the y-axis. And so most of what I'll be talking about today lies at the intersection is focused at the regional level. So we do a lot of work at the small within village level, but I'll be talking about my work at the regional level. And then also more shorter term movements, so daily and periodic movements to other villages and communities in a region rather than migration. And so this work really kind of took off with a lot of exciting findings with the widespread proliferation of mobile phones and access to GPS data. But where we work in rural Madagascar really highlights the limitations of some of these approaches. So you can see at the bottom here, this figure shows it's a heat map predicting sort of the COVID-19 cases using mobile phone data and other sort of transit data, ways to get at mobility through sort of open source means. And darker colors show better prediction and lighter colors show worse prediction. And as you can see across the country, these data performed relatively poorly in actually predicting COVID-19 cases. And so there's still it doesn't solve all of our problems for understanding mobility, particularly in these settings. And so as an anthropologist, I like to take a step back and say, okay, well, what tools do we have to think theoretically about human behavioral ecology, particularly as it relates to different subsistence and livelihood strategies? And can we use that framework to make really solid predictions about what people's movement patterns might look like in these settings? And so the first thing to highlight within this framework, right, is that travel is costly. It's energetically costly, it's socially costly, you have to leave your family behind potentially, it's financially costly, and it also increases your risk, right? You have more risk of injury and even death in certain settings where travel is really rough. But it can also be really beneficial. It can provide new energetic and financial resources, new information, and new friends that might really incentivize travel. And so Robert Kelly, thinking about this spectrum or this trade-off, he laid out in his book, The Life Ways of Hunter-Gatherers, which is really looking at different sort of across the foraging spectrum, from really sedentary foragers to really active foragers across human history, using archaeological data, sort of what do we see in terms of typical patterns of why people move more or less. And one thing that he highlighted is that, yes, local abundance matters. So in this work, usually you get lots of agricultural production and people tend to stay put. But what he said is that the regional abundance also matters. So you might have high, local abundance, good productive agriculture, but if you also have high regional abundance, if there's good resources out in your environment, you're still going to be incentivized to move broadly as well. And so you can kind of think about this gradient here of movement patterns. And so in terms of Madagascar, I was really interested. Most of this work has been used to explain why sedentism, right? So why do you go from being hypermobile to being more sedentary? But the people we work with in Madagascar are primarily subsistence farmers living a relatively sedentary lifestyle. And so when you think about infectious disease transmission, when would you expect people to become more mobile? And so the framing for this all revolves around vanilla markets. So in the 1980s, Malagasy government passed market liberalization policies that really incentivized the growth of vanilla as a cash crop to meet global demand. And you can see here in this figure from a 2015 paper that the number of commercial plants that were grown per household really starts to take off, and people really change sort of their economic strategy. And so how I think about this in terms of sort of Kelly's framework is to say here in green, it's that pre-1980s expansion of the vanilla market, relatively good productive agriculture, but not a lot of cash to afford visiting friends, not a lot of reasons to go to markets to buy and sell things. But then once you have this infusion of a cash-based cash crop market, the vanilla market, it pushes you up this, the idea that it could push you up this gradient, and so that you're not any less productive at home necessarily, but there's more reason all of a sudden to move about your environment. So to get at these questions, like I said, a lot of our work kind of is based in a few villages around our JG National Park in the Northeast. But what we've been doing recently is trying to expand out to a broader sample of villages to really get a picture of regional movement, regional disease transmission. And so as part of my dissertation work, we were able to visit 34 different villages and get kind of a quick convenience sample of about 100 people per village, so about 3,400 people total. And for each of those people, we were able to ask them about their movement patterns and then also their economic activities. And then they provided dried blood spot samples as well, which allow us to get at infectious disease exposure. And so the first step is kind of like, well, are we seeing that gradient of market integration that we expect in the area? And so in terms of mobility, just quick methods is that we ask people to name up to 5 communes. And so this is one administrative unit above village that they have traveled to in the past year. And then for each of those communes, ask them about their travel frequency, their duration, their reason for traveling there, their mode, and a bunch of travel mode and a bunch of other questions as well. And then in order to capture that economic component, we focused on 3 main measures of market integration. So one was an inventory of the durable goods that people own. So think radios, televisions, those sorts of things. An index of house materials that they use to construct their houses. So that ranges from more gatherable materials that are readily available in your environment, like bamboo, to materials you have to purchase, like metal sheets and bricks, those sorts of things. And then we also asked people to name the different crops that they grow, and for each crop to estimate the percentage that they sell at market and the percentage that they use to feed their family at home. So again, really getting at that more directly at that spectrum of subsistence to cash crop farming. And I know this figure to the right is very tiny, but the big takeaway is that each of these panels is a different one of those market integration measures. And you can see that we are seeing a decent amount of variation both within and across the 34 villages. And so kind of give high level kind of what I'm initially finding and with all of this. So for whether or not market integration increases individual level mobility, sort of what we're able to do is construct these cool networks where we have the intercommune travel. And so on the right, you can see the Sava region, and each of the gray sort of lines shows the boundaries of different communes. And so each orange dot is a different center point in a different commune, and the blue edges represent travel between the communes. And we're able to break those travel patterns out by the different types, reasons for travel. And we see that economic and visiting family and friends are the main reasons people are giving for most of their travel. And a lot of this is also concurrent. So people find that people go to markets to buy different goods, but then they also are visiting their friends and family along those trips as well. And so over here on the right, this is results from a model where we are looking at, so in orange, it's modeling the frequency of travel as the response variable, and in blue, it's the distance travel as the response variable, and the prediction being that greater market integration should be associated with more frequent and longer distance travel. And what we do is we do find some evidence for this. So people have more market-based wealth, so they have, they're able to buy more durable goods, are traveling more frequently and traveling farther, and then also are people who sell more of the crops also seem to travel more. But then also that education, being more educated, and also working non-farming occupations also seems to be an important part of the picture. Um, and so moving right along, I'm cognizant of time as well, but I think the next step is to kind of link this to some form of infectious disease data. And so what we have initially is I had the opportunity to travel to visit some of our colleagues in Singapore. I'm very much not a lab person, but we were able to do neutralizing antibody tests for 17 variants of SARS-CoV-2 to see then if travel patterns and market activities predict infection patterns with SARS-CoV-2. And so you can see here on the right, so in red and blue, it's predicting infection with pre-Omicron variants. In orange, it's Omicron variants, and then in red, it's both variants. What we see is that individual level mobility doesn't actually seem to be as important for predicting infection, but we do see that other aspects of sort of demographic aspects, like if you're a shopkeeper or a carpenter or have some other main source of livelihood besides farming, you do have higher rates of infection or higher odds of infection. And we also see some gendered and age patterns. And so that's leading us to wonder maybe it has to do less with individuals' mobility patterns, maybe more to do with the community context, because we do see a decent amount of variation across the villages in the variant richness, which you can see here on the right. So all the way from very low rates of infection across all variants to pretty high rates of infection with almost all of the variants, and there's a lot of cross-reactivity there, but I think it's still helpful to get that broader picture across the variants. And so we're starting to look at the village level what might predict rates of infection. And so it looks like that travel time to healthcare, for instance, might be important. So maybe it doesn't matter how much you're individually mobile, but if you live in a village that has a clinic, which is not all of the villages by any means, then you might have a higher exposure to sick people coming to the clinic to be treated. And so again, it might be your movement, but maybe a movement of sick people to your clinic, and things like that. And so looking forward, we're still working to analyze the blood spot samples for a lot of other sort of information on infectious disease. So we're looking at assays to get at flaviviruses like dengue, and then also using FIPSeq and the VirScan library to get at broad patterns of viral exposure to see differences in if you're living more of a subsistence strategy, maybe you're exposed to more zoonotic diseases. If you're living a more market integrated lifestyle, maybe you're exposed to more human specific diseases. So trying to get at broad patterns of viral exposure. And then also on the network side, there's a lot to dig into in terms of, do we see unique couplings of people and specific villages that they tend to travel to, and are there infection patterns that are related to those distinct pairings? And then also, can we do some link prediction in terms of actually predicting those intercommune movement patterns, and then do some modeling to understand how important those missing links potentially are for understanding transmission dynamics, and then also what's most important for predicting those movement patterns as well. And so with that, this is a huge, big team effort. We have an amazing field team that has had to deal with tipping over canoes and rivers to get to some of these villages and all sorts of things, and they've been amazing to work with. And then also all my colleagues at Duke and our other universities and our funding as well. So that